Welcome to the Hot Cam's Honda CRF Single Cam Installation Guide, Step 1. Before you begin, locate the bike in a secure upright position on a stand and make sure the bike is stable. Begin by removing the seat and the fuel tank. Make sure the fuel petcock is in the off position before removing the fuel hose from the carburetor, and be prepared to catch any overflow gasoline that may still be in the fuel line. Remove the spark plug cap. Remove the breather hose clamp from the valve cover using your hands or a pair of pliers. With the hose clamp removed, you can then remove the breather hose from the valve cover with your hand. You may need to gently pry on the hose to break it free. Now, remove the 3 10mm valve cover bolts with a socket or suitable wrench. Once the 3 bolts are removed, gently lift the valve cover off the engine with your hands. Remove the spark plug to allow the engine to rotate freely. Remove the crankshaft access hole cover in the clutch cover on the right-hand side of the engine. Once removed, you should see the hex head opening in the end of the crankshaft bolt. The next step is to remove the flywheel timing inspection hole cover. Using the hex wrench inserted in the end of the crankshaft on the right side of the engine, rotate the crankshaft clockwise until the top dead center or TDC alignment mark appears in the inspection window in the flywheel cover. This removes pressure on the lifters and the cam chain and sets the engine at the top of the compression stroke. Check that none of the cam lobes are pushing against either the intake or the exhaust cam lifters. The lobes should be pointing slightly outwards, and the cam timing mark should line up with the marker on the cam carrier. If not, rotate the crankshaft again one full turn until it is lined up again on the TDC mark. Next, loosen the decompressor assembly on the right-hand side of the cam with a hex wrench or socket. Loosen and remove the center bolt on the cam chain tensioner. Next, loosen both of the 8mm cam chain tensioner bolts, alternating from side to side a little on each bolt until the tensioner is completely free. Carefully remove the cam chain tensioner assembly from the cylinder. Now, remove the cam chain sprocket bolts the rest of the way with your hand. You will need to rotate the engine slowly to have access to both of the bolts. Use the hex wrench to rotate the crankshaft as necessary. With the cam sprocket bolts removed, carefully slide the cam chain and sprocket off the end of the cam together and let them rest in the top of the head assembly. Do not move or rotate the crankshaft once you have aligned the timing mark. Do not allow the timing chain to fall into the engine, and do not attempt to rotate the engine with the sprocket and chain resting in this position. Using a crosswise incremental pattern, remove the 4 cam carrier mounting bolts. With the cam carrier bolts removed, gently break the cam carrier loose with your hands. Tap gently on the sides of the carrier with a rubber mallet to break it free if necessary. Now, you are ready to lift off the cam carrier assembly along with the cam. You must lift slowly and gently on the cam carrier up and away from the motor. Use your fingers, if possible, to slide underneath the cam carrier into the two intake lifters to ensure that the lifters and shims do not fall into the engine as you remove the cam and carrier. The shims will often stick to the underside of the two intake lifters, so be careful not to drop a shim into the engine. Shims that are stuck can be removed with a magnet. The Honda CRF 250R and CRF 450R and other Unicam models have two intake lifters and 4 shims that sit on top of each valve beneath the lifters. The Honda models use a rocker arm assembly, so there are no lifters for the two exhaust valves. Moving to a workbench or table, remove the decompressor assembly from the cam. Remove the large cam bearing retaining circlip in the end of the cam carrier. Tap out the bearing from the inside of the cam carrier outwards. With the cam end bearing removed, you can now remove the cam from the carrier. Note that the left hand bearing is permanently mounted on the camshaft and cannot be removed. Remove the hot cam from its packaging and install it into the cam carrier. Insert the bearing retainer circlip into the cam carrier. It is highly recommended that you use a new circlip. Make certain that the circlip is properly installed and that it is completely seated in the groove all the way around the bearing. Reinstall the decompressor assembly into the cam with the detent pin in the alignment hole on the end of the cam. Clean the top of the lifters and apply a generous amount of assembly lube to the top and sides of both lifters. You must lubricate this contact area to avoid engine damage at startup. Insert the two lifters into the base of the cam carrier and ensure that they will move smoothly up and down without any binding. Lubricate the end of the cam in and around the decompressor with assembly lube. Make sure the original shims are properly installed and seated on the top of the valve springs. Install the cam carrier assembly back onto the head with the cam rotated to the TDCC position. Install the 4 retaining bolts and tighten them in a crosswise fashion to 9 foot-pounds. The lobes on the cam should not be touching the lifters, and the cam should rotate freely. If not, remove the cam and reinstall it, making certain that it is fully seated and in proper alignment. Apply a generous amount of assembly lube to the bearings and lobes of the new hot cam where it makes contact with the lifters and rocker arm. Before reinstalling the cam sprocket and completing the installation, you will need to measure each of the valve clearances. Measuring and adjusting the valve clearance, or lash, will be covered in Step 2 of this installation guide.